I'm here today with our good friend Jennifer Grant. Jennifer is the award-winning author of picture books for children and books for adults. Her adult books include When Did Everybody Else Get So Old? And her new book, Dimming the Day, Evening Meditations for Quiet Wonder, that we're going to talk more about today. Her books for children include Maybe God is Like That Too, Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too, and her latest, which is entitled Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago. Jen's work has appeared in Women's Day, Chicago Parent, Pathos, and Hermeneutics, and she's a founding member of INK, a creative collective. Jen holds a master's degree in English literature with concentrations in creative writing and critical theory from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. She recently joined the board of Gender Nation, an organization she loves. Gender Nation helps communities empower and validate all children by providing public school libraries with LGBTQ plus affirming literature. A lifelong Episcopalian and mother of four, she lives in Chicago. Jen and I have partnered on many different projects. She's spoken at several Writing for Your Life conferences and is the curator of the Faith and Food section of the Compassionate Christianity website. And she will be one of our featured speakers next week at our online Christian Children's Book Conference. So Jennifer, it's a wonderful pleasure again to have you here.
Well, thank you. Thanks. It's always fun to talk together.
Yes. I love, catching up with you, and you've been so productive from a book perspective here recently that, it's just really exciting to see these wonderful books just keep coming out.
Well, thank you.
So before we get into the new one, tell us about some of the previous ones. Which one would you like to talk about? Ones. I'd like to hear more about, several books. So which ones would you like to talk
about? Let's see. Well, I think I keep hearing from people who are experiencing and walking through grief with their children and their families in this time for obvious reasons. There's been so much loss and death. And so the picture book that came out last year, A Little Blue Bottle,
yes,
I've had more conversations about that book than some of my other ones recently. It's a book that is, I hope, a very gentle kind of handling of death and suggests that the underlying theme is that God is with us when we're grieving. But it's about a little girl whose really close friend and neighbor, an elderly woman, dies, and the little girl is really grieving this loss and talking with her mom about it. And then the mom suggests that they kind of reflect on this verse that God collects our tears in a bottle, and that's the little blue bottle that's referenced in the title. And so, yeah, even earlier today, I heard from a reader whose pet had died, and they, with their children, had read that book and found comfort in it. So, so that's one. And then we talked recently about Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago. This one, we talked only, a month or two ago about that. So there's another interview with you about that one. So.
Yes. I mean, another just excellent book. I mean, tell people what that one's about.
Once Upon a Time Not So Long Ago is about the pandemic and how it continues really to shape us and to shape our priorities, our experience of connection and family and each other. And it's about how it's again about loss. I was kind of reflecting that the last two picture books that I've had published are really about grief and loss. And but I hope also have an underlying idea that there is also a reason to hope, and there's also a reason to look at the beautiful things and the graces in our lives. And so this one I tried to kind of give the story of the pandemic breaking out all over the world. So there's different cultures represented, there's different religions and different, it's a very inclusive book in that it shows that I didn't make this sort of like the pandemic happened to Americans. I'm happy about this one. And one thing that I think I mentioned to you when we spoke about it initially is that the publisher put these kind of journal pages at the end of the book and invites the readers to kind of remember what they most have lost during this time or what they have gained during this time. And I was a little resistant to that because I don't know, I just didn't like the idea of people like picking up a library book and finding it all scribbled in. But that's something that so many people now have said to me is meaningful, is that they're sitting with their kids and writing down their children's perspectives. So then in 5 or 10 or 20 years, that person will remember something specific about what this time was like for them. So I'm glad that the publisher overruled my my desire not to have those journal pages.
Well, I'm really glad that you wrote those two books, Blue Bottle and Once Upon a Time. They're so needed right now. And,
Thank you.
whatever we can do to help children deal with this crazy world that we have is really, really important. So thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to the new book. As I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the title of it is Dimming the Day, Evening Meditations for Quiet Wonder. What motivated you to write that book?
Yeah, I actually started working on this a few years ago. I wrote a proposal, I was sketching out a proposal maybe 2.5 years ago after having read, and I write about this a little bit in the introduction, but I had read about the fact that there are people called awe researchers, AWE, and they have established through a lot of different studies that when we experience awe, particularly in nature or outdoors, our depression, anxiety, these things can be truly addressed. So, and in the book, I talk about the fact that when I mention anxiety in the book, I'm really talking about normal anxiety, like the kind of anxiety that if you get better sleep and exercise and meditate, you can feel better, as opposed to clinical anxiety, which a person would need, medication and professional help and so on. So, so I kind of make the point in this that this isn't instead of getting like medical help for clinical anxiety, it's really about the sort of low level normal anxiety that so many of us experience right now. When our worries keep us awake in the middle of the night, when we're feeling concerned about the state of the world, as I know you are concerned, but you're doing good things to sort of address it. But anyway, so Dimming the Day is, when I first was conceiving it, I thought I'll find a list of things that I find awe-inspiring and do research into them, into the real science of them, and then write reflections on those for people so they can, instead of at the end of the day be kind of worried and tossing and turning and checking their phone and their news feeds, they could, like I love to do, read about something in nature and just feel that beautiful, peaceful feeling that there's something bigger than us, and there's something that will last after us. The moon will be there and it has been there without us. And so in a way, the book is about being very small and insignificant, and yet celebrating the fact that we are here and that we can enjoy these things in nature, and we can engage in a way that will, I hope, bring some calm and address anxiety.
So as part of the book then talking about going outdoors and enjoying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think, and I wrote this during, so I wrote the proposal a couple of years ago, and then I sort of shelved it. I was working on other things. And then it was funny, my last like big speaking engagement before everything shut down, I had a speaking engagement to a large group of women who had a book club with their denomination. It was like I think maybe a Lutheran denominational book club. And in the context of that, I read a chapter that was in a sample chapter I was working on for the proposal for this book. And after the engagement, and this was at the end of February in 2020, all these people came up to me and they were buying my other books, but they kept saying, I want to buy that one that you read from today. And I thought, well, it's only a proposal at the moment. So I actually...
Well, that's good to hear, though.
Yeah, no, it was
free demand for.
Exactly. So I sort of immediately, went home and polished up that proposal and sent it to my agent, and then Broadleaf Books bought it, and I started writing it right at the end of March in 2020. So it turned out to be a slightly different book than what I had originally conceived, because I do reflect specifically on the fact that, we're really living in a time of anxiety. And I note in it a few different places about how the pandemic really did change people's relationships with nature. So many more people were at home, had more time to go outside, stare at the clouds, watch the birds outside their windows, plant gardens, go to the, Humane Society and adopt a pet, so many different ways that the suffering and the kind of loss and the kind of isolation of the pandemic has resulted in people connecting in new ways with nature. So yes, each chapter has to do with something in nature and kind of reflecting on how we can engage with it.
I mean, it's interesting just for me to reflect back on my own experience through the pandemic with my wife that, we ended up adopting a rescue dog during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic because my wife quit working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made that easier to do. And we certainly were trying to take advantage of as many easy hiking trails all over the place that we could, around reservoirs and different
Mm-hmm.
parks and things like that. Just they really heightened our need to be outdoors and with
Yeah.
nature. So I can really
Mm-hmm.
see what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, no, it did. I think so many people, if you just skim through the news or skim through, your favorite magazine or whatever, there's been so many essays and editorials about our kind of renewed sense of connection with nature, which I think is great. I mean, that would be a great outcome after this really difficult time.
So there has certainly been plenty of books written on meditations and reflections, and there's certainly been plenty of books written about, communing with nature, so to speak. How does your book differ from other books that have been out there?
Yeah, well, I think it is really a different book, and it's funny. If you look at it, there are a lot of endorsements at the beginning of the book, and normally an editor will say, reach out to a handful of people, and we're trying to get a couple of endorsements. And I actually sent it to a lot of people. Most of these people I don't know, but um, I did that because I thought the book was different. And I thought, I wonder if people are going to find it too quirky that they they won't want to offer an endorsement. So I sent it to a lot of people, but happily I received a lot of really nice words about it. But the way it's different is that each chapter, in addition to having some scientific information on whatever the topic is in nature, um, I also tried to bring in other voices. So in a way, it's a book that has a lot of curated content. So it's got, um, you know, reflections that there's one chapter where I write about visiting a volcano in Guatemala, and I found this reflection by a naturalist from hundreds of years ago who went to the same place. And so I put his reflections on what it's like to be in this huge, walking on this sort of lava field. And I kind of I wanted to bring in other voices, and I wanted to introduce writers that mean something to me. And so each chapter has my own words, my own kind of, crystallization of the research I did about whatever the topic is. Then there's some personal connection, but then I always bring in another writer, either a poet or a naturalist or a novelist, just to kind of give another layer of perspective on whatever the topic is. And then each chapter also ends with a literal meditation where I really tried to go through kind of the greatest hits of meditation, like body scan and breathing meditations and so on. And so where relevant to the content, I have these specific directives for people. So if they're lying in bed, I have kind of instructions on how they can meditate and kind of end the day in this quiet way, again, in hopes that it will help people to relax and find calm and sort of set aside their anxiety for the day and have a good sleep. So the whole idea is to help people sleep. But
That's a
with
good thing.
those, yeah, and with those meditations, I have a very good friend who is a yogi. She lives in LA, and we've been writing partners and friends for a really long, for decades. And because she has led people through so many different yoga meditations,
Hmm.
I hired her to actually really closely rake through all the directives at the end of each chapter, because I didn't want to be I don't want to activate, restlessness or anxiety in people. I wanted to do the opposite. So she had some great, sort of tweaks of saying, no, with this one, let's start with the head and work down to the toe, or, or let's have them take 4 deep breaths here, and so on. And so that, that part I think was an important component. So yeah, the chapters they all sort of follow the same, most of them follow the same structure of introducing the topic, bringing in another voice about it, and then having kind of a specific, very practical reflection that each person can do at the end. So
Very cool. That's a great organizational structure. I mean, it sounds very unique and interesting.
thank you.
And how many chapters are there?
So there's 20 chapters, and the topics are things like, well, it's in so many ways a book about looking and about observing. So I started with a chapter on the human eye, and then there's other topics like dandelions, humpback whales, mangrove forests, hummingbirds, a place, St. Paul's Rocks, honey, and on, murmurations, redwoods, clouds, and so on. And so there's 20 chapters, and each one kind of digs into those topics.
Interesting. So this is kind of a real tangent, but have you ever thought of writing a book like that associated with different cocktails?
No, no, but that's a fun idea.
As you mentioned these different topics that are chapters of the books, I was thinking to myself, you could write one on a gin martini, or one on, a Long Island iced tea, or, I just had this interesting drink called Autumn Haze yesterday. So anyway,
yeah. Oh, that's a great thought. That's very fun. I like a book I gave to a friend a couple years ago at Christmas, a book that had stories about cocktails. Like it had, it would name one, tell how to make it, and then either show where it was used, like F. Scott Fitzgerald discussed this in this book.
Yes.
Or yeah.
That
sounds fun.
Well, anyway, we're always full of new book ideas, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
You've got a long list, or I'm sure longer than mine. So that's a good thing.
That's a fun idea.
So, what would be like the one thing you'd love people to take away from this book?
I guess the one thing that I would love is for all of us to maintain this new posture that we have toward nature, which is, I think many of us are spending more time. And I actually referenced that in Once Upon a Time not so long ago. There's a spread that is something like people looked up at the sky more. I hope we'll hang on to that, because I think that slowing down and noticing the beauty that's around us can really be a balm. And I think, one of the things so many of us have said after this time and during this time is that we were forced to slow down and sort of go into slow motion. And the result of that for many of us was to sort of look at trees and leaves and connect. And so I hope this book will encourage that. I hope this time will encourage that. And that more broadly, that this new appreciation and this new slowed down noticing of the natural world will help us be more committed to caring for it. And this book sort of follows an arc that way, in that I sort of start the book saying, we can find calm individually, and we can find rest when we engage with nature. And then it kind of moves into corporate, and we start talking about how we can wish well for others and how we can engage with others. And then at the end of the book, the last chapter is about the moon. And I kind of encourage everyone to think kind of a loving kindness meditation for the earth. And so yeah, I mean, it would be great if people read this and felt, their commitment to earth care underscored. That would be wonderful.
Yes, totally agree. So, I know, as I mentioned earlier, you're very productive, and I know you're doing things beyond just your own books. So, and I know there are projects you probably can't talk about, which is perfectly fine. But what's on the horizon? Can you say anything about, the other work that you
Yeah,
do outside of your own books? And then
sure.
also what you can say about any future books?
You bet. Well, I just finished, and it's in copy edits right now, a book for church publishing that our friend Milton Brasher Cunningham asked me to jump into. And this book is a book about prayer for children. And the the way I kind of structured that, it was very open-ended, like a book of about prayer for children like 7 to 10 years old. And so I kind of looked at what was out there and again, really wanted it to be different and to be fresh and also appropriate for kids now. So, so the book, each chapter is named for a verb, so there's touch, taste, spin, write, create, cry, question, see, and each chapter, again, I did follow also kind of a template of each chapter starts with a description of whatever that verb is or some way to connect with that word, like touch. I started with a description of how our fingertips have so many receptors and how we touch. And then I went into each one also then kind of goes into a Bible story. And I told the story in that chapter about how when Jesus was teaching and people brought the woman who was caught in adultery to him and said, can we kill her? Basically, I softened it for the book because it is for children. Um, and Jesus kind of crouches down and he just kind of draws in the dust with his fingers. And so that Bible story is about touch and how touch can be a prayer. And maybe he was writing a prayer. Maybe he was writing the word love. Maybe he was writing her name. Maybe he was writing, the names of the people with whom these particular men had had affairs. Who knows? But that one, each one ends with a prayer. So it's a more specifically very Christian book about different ways that kids can pray. And I was trying to kind of make sure that it included kids who were verbal, kids who are not so verbal, kids who like to
Wow.
move. And so that comes out in March of 2022. And
Very
I'm
cool.
excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I've got
yeah,
one grandchild in that age range and several more on their way. So that'll
that's
be
great.
great for them.
Yeah, and that book, again, is with Church Publishing as well. And actually what's so great is there's little, very simple line drawings, really beautiful drawings throughout the book. And those were also done by Gillian Whiting, who did
Hmm.
A Little Blue Bottle and Once Upon a Time Not So Long
Nice.
Ago. So
Nice.
I love collaborating with her. So that comes out then. And then I have a book deadline. I'm writing now a book for Beaming Books. And it's not exactly, but I mean, the quickest way to describe it is it's kind of like doing this but for kids, but
Wow.
it's not nighttime reflections, but it's reflections on nature and finding calm in nature. And that one is not a Christian book, so it's really more, it's for a general audience, but it's about, going out and seeing what we can learn from a tree or from a bird or from the way they behave and also engaging with them. So I feel really passionate right now about earth care um, and about finding ways to help people engage and enjoy nature and find wonder and awe in it. So that book is due in February, and I'm hard at work at that at the moment.
Nice. Nice. And for people who don't know, I mean, you also do freelance editing. You do
Hmm.
editing for other publications. So
Hmm.
you're very busy at all of that. It's very productive.
Well, I like to work. I really do.
So before I let you go, can you tell us a little bit about Gender Nation that I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Gender Nation is an organization that a very close friend of mine co-founded a few years ago. And uh, it was born of the knowledge that stories can be such beautiful mirrors for people and such beautiful windows. And that's something that my friend Keiko Feldman, who helped to found this, says a lot, that books can be mirrors and windows. And so a kid, who is in a public school and goes to the library and there's no, there are no books that reflect or mirror their experience, can really end up with a distorted view of themselves. And, as you know, LGBTQ kids have higher rates of depression, and they take their lives more often than other children. And as a children's book writer and as a mom and as a Christian, I really want all kids to flourish, and I want all kids to be celebrated. And so Gender Nation started really small in a particular area of California, in the LA area, and has grown throughout the state and now is growing into a nationwide organization. But basically, we curate lists of books that are affirming and not necessarily overtly about being an LGBTQ kid, but about difference, and about, some of them of course are, but some of them are just stories about difference, or things that embrace an idea that it's okay to be different, and it's okay to be yourself, and it's not only okay, it's wonderful. So anyway, we have bought books, delivered them to public schools in California, are moving into a more nationwide effort. And again and again and again, school librarians are talking about how delighted they are, and how what a relief it is to have really healthy and positive books to share with kids who are looking for them. And so, and I think it will help not only kids who do identify as LGBTQ, but it'll help kids who just are their friends to understand and to accept and celebrate difference. So I hope it'll be, and I know it has already made it a wonderful effect in a very particular part of the country, but I look forward to seeing it kind of spread across the country as well.
Very cool. And so people Google Gender Nation, I assume they'll find their website.
Yeah, gendernation.org is the website. And I was excited to learn pretty recently that they are listing, there's some books from Beaming Books that are being included. I'm not sure if they'll be if it's a specifically Christian book, it can't be put into a public school library, but we're also working on curating a list, much like what you've done, but more specifically about these issues, for them to put on their website of Christian or other religious books that are affirming.
Excellent.
And so, yeah, it's a great organization, and I hope that, culture is changing, and kids need to be, I don't know, they need to be able to learn in their public school libraries, and it is a mandate that school libraries really speak to the diverse makeup of their populations, and obviously, this falls into that. So
Good. And back to your work. Let people know what your website address is.
Oh, my website is jennifergrant.com, and on Instagram, my page is Jennifer Grant Writer. So,
and Twitter, I think, is Jennifer C. Grant.
That's right. Yep.
Good.
Yeah.
That's kind of a common name, so you're really fortunate to have jennifergrant.com.
I know. I got it early enough, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. It is such a common name. I mean, I routinely get email for all manner of Jennifer Grants, from TV stars to podiatrists to college, professors. I get kids telling me why their paper is late, and there's a realtor, Jennifer Grant, and I get people saying they want to see a certain house. So I get, I sort of collect them. I would love to write something about it sometime because it's so funny.
Well, that's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jen, thanks again for all your work.
Mm-hmm.
You're so caring and so thoughtful with all these different things that you do. So really appreciate your work greatly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.